to our folks in the audience, so to speak. Zoom is so funny. It feels like we're in the front in the panel, but you know, we're kind of not. If there's anything that you want to talk about or ask and that you would prefer that we pause the recording, just say so. No problem. We'll pause that recording. We can have a more private discussion. Yeah, I think it might be helpful. Thank you. Oh, I see it's recording now. I think it might be helpful for us to be able to share some of these insights widely. So my illustrious team of panelists, I invite you, or I'm going to invite you to just introduce yourself briefly, maybe tell us a bit about what you teach, and to kick off this faculty panel, maybe I should have asked you to prepare this in advance perhaps, but let's see what you have on the fly. Maybe one flub or whatever you would call it from your own college experiences that you recall, so we can all commiserate a little bit together with some of the hurdles that we've overcome, and one piece of advice for first-gen students. And I'm guessing that the flub and the advice are probably hand in hand. So I'll go first to give you a little bit of time for thinking. I wasn't technically going to be a faculty panel member, but the moderator, but I'm going to warm us up here, and you know me, I can't help but to chime in often, so be ready for that. So I'm Lisa Nunn. I teach in the sociology department, and I'm going to share something about office hours. So I distinctly remember being a first-year student, and I'm not sure how long it took me to learn something different, but for a very long time, and definitely through my first year, I just didn't know what office hours were, and I knew they existed. Like I knew that was a thing. I had learned about it once I got to campus, but I was 100% convinced that if you went to office hours to ask a question or to clarify something about the material, that if I did that, that I would be telling my professor, do not give me an A. I don't deserve it. I don't understand the material. Your class is too hard for me. I can't possibly be, deserving of a good grade. So I never went because I was just sure that it was like admitting isn't even the right word, like proclaiming, I do not have your material wired and I should never get an A. And I really wanted an A. So I just never went. So my advice probably is obvious, but my advice to students is to see office hours as a chance to just say hi. You don't even have to talk about the class. You can just pop in and say hello. You can talk about the class and ask your questions. It does not mean that you will never get an A or should not get an A, but also it's a chance to tell your professor what you really like about this material, or to find out, like, is there another book, another reading, another experiment that I can do? Can you put something in my hands to help me learn more or think more about this really exciting piece of the class that we had this week, or something like that? You can build on what you know, not just get answers to things that you feel like you haven't mastered yet. So there's me. Can I call on, I don't know, Tim, are you ready to introduce yourself? Thanks.
Sure. Hi, my name is Tim Randall. I teach in the English department, and I teach both first year and advanced writing. And I also teach literature courses, mostly in American modernism, including the Harlem Renaissance and the Jazz Age. I also do other things in the department that have to do with career development. I oversee internships for English majors and minors, and I also direct a tutoring program in which USD students go to local elementary and middle schools. And I'm a first-generation college student who didn't step into a college classroom until I was 33 years old. Up until that time, I dropped out of high school. And for various reasons, I think a lot of the reasons had really to do with, well, one, I wasn't very good at school, and two, I school wasn't doing it for me where I was growing up. I grew up in a small town in West Virginia, and I was the odd kid. I used to skip school and go read a book, so it was good preparation for eventually becoming an English major. But I think for me, one of the biggest flubs I made, really, it wasn't something that happened externally or that I could locate in a single moment, but it had to do with self-perception. Because I was older, when I first walked into a college classroom, there were lots of mixed emotions and psychological feelings about being out of place, feeling like I don't click with the rest of the class and all that stuff. And I tended to look at my age and my experience, because by that time I had been in the military for 3 years. I served in Germany, in the Army. I had taken all sorts of crazy odd jobs. I'd lived in New York City and Frankfurt, Germany, and Chicago, and so on. I had all these life experiences, but I didn't see that as a plus. I saw that as being just not in the right place at the right time. And I think that was very debilitating for me, because it was very difficult, I think, to ground myself and to bring my own experiences and interests to bear as I pursued an education, because I always felt like maybe it was stuff I should have known already, or it was things I should have done, or I should have had jumped over these bars by that point in my career. And I think the best thing I ever did was finally, and it took a while, it wasn't overnight, I didn't have a revelation, but it was slowly over time, and maybe it was getting through my undergraduate and then eventually going to graduate school, that I really began to feel much more comfortable and to really start to pursue things that I was interested in and that were grounded in my own personal experience, and things that had to do maybe with being a first generation college student. One of the reasons I didn't go and maybe wasn't prepared was because I didn't come from a solid middle class background. So coming to terms with that, coming to terms with not coming from a place that seems kind of typical for many middle class kids, and not being a kid anymore, I had to find some way to feel at home. And I eventually did. And there's no single one thing that led me to be able to do that. But it's just any advice I would give to somebody is try to get there as quickly as possible to realize that you do have something to bring that other people don't.
Thank you so much. That was really, I feel like I know you so much better now. Thank you, just in those few minutes of sharing some of your life story with us. Sue, can I ask you to be next?
Sure. I'm Sue Lowery. I'm the chair of the biology department, and I teach in our introductory series and also biological oceanography, which is an upper division advanced writing class in biology. And I'll be teaching with Christian next year. So, and I am also a first generation college student. And I must say that I was kind of mystified by the whole process of how you actually go about choosing a college or anything like that. And I think if it weren't for my church youth group, they took us over to the faith-based college that was associated with our denomination, and we all took a test. And I did well on the test, and they gave me a scholarship. So that's kind of how I picked my college. And then my flub, because that was a good thing, getting a scholarship is always a good thing. But my flub was, it was a very small school, and kind of, there were like 2.5 people in the biology, department. And so I think I was kind of run out of classes by the time I hit my sophomore year. And so I transferred in the middle of the year to a very large state university, which was not a good idea. At the timing wasn't a good idea. I mean, ultimately it worked out in the end, but boy, what a rough semester to show up at a really large university with, 15,000 people when I'd been used to a place with 800. And and not really knowing anything about how to make my way around college, particularly because being the first in my family. So so that leads me to the advice that I can give to students is, like I said, I had a really rough semester with that transition, and I was, of course, put into all of the last choice classes since you come in the middle of the year. And two of them really were very, very poor fits. And so I dropped out and took a W and was terrified that my life was over. And then I want to say to students, like I say to all the students, no one has ever asked me why I did that. So like nobody at a job interview, nobody at a graduate school interview, nobody for future scholarships, nobody other than my parents that semester, nobody else has ever asked me, why are there 2 W's on your college transcript? And so relax, give yourself a break. You will run into tough things, but you will figure out how to get around them. And so, give yourself space.
Thanks for that. I'm going to use your story of encouraging my students to feel
Please
okay about a
do.
W. Yeah, thank you. Drew, can I invite you in to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Drew Talley. I teach in environmental and ocean sciences. And I also, for almost 20 years now, have been the science director for a local nonprofit that works in the underserved community of City Heights, getting kids involved in STEM education. And I think, let me see, one embarrassing example of something I messed up as an undergrad. And I was an undergrad for a long, long time. So I had plenty of time to make mistakes. And one of them was I think I just missed one really long lab in one of my biology classes. And there had been a bunch of work that was done in that lab. And so I was super embarrassed to show up again. Like when the next week came around, I was like, oh God, how can I, that teacher seems so nice. And I've kind of let them down. So the second week, I also didn't show up. I just couldn't bring myself to face the embarrassment of going into the lab. And as you can imagine, that just compiled. So I basically never reappeared in that lab and ended up failing that class because I never showed up to lab, all because I was just too embarrassed to go and say, hey, what can I do to make that up? How can I fix it? And I guess so my advice would be, on a much broader scale, probably most people aren't as pathological as I was, and so wouldn't have that problem with embarrassment of going into a class that you missed. But the other thing is, I later got to know that lab instructor. She was super nice and would have done whatever was needed to work with me to get me help. But the other thing was, I don't know why I was so resistant to asking for help, but I just was. I would not go and seek help in any class or for anything. And I see that in a lot of my students, and I would say especially in first gen students, in part because you don't know who to ask for help, but also you don't want to be perceived as needy or someone who needs that assistance. You want to be tough and on your own. And I would just say my perspective has shifted 180 degrees. And I see now that not only do other people want to help you, but that by asking for help, you're often doing them a favor because they actually feel better, even about themselves afterwards. They're like, wow, I really got to help that student out and help them figure out where to get tutoring or how to find a resource or something. So, boy, I wish I could have saved myself a lot of time and heartache by being willing to be vulnerable and just reach out and try and get help.
Yeah, here. Thank you for that. Well, now that you know a little bit about us, I open the floor to questions, or I don't know, even just sharing something that's going on for you and see if we've got some ideas that might be of service to you. I think we're small enough. I would love it if you use the raised hand feature, but I think we're also small enough where if we get the conversation going, feel free to just unmute yourself and chime in. But what's on your minds? My students always laugh because I'm super comfortable with silence. And I tell them that all the textbooks say that you should slowly count to 7 after you've asked for questions to give people time to formulate them. So you feel free to take your time. We are full of stories, so we can just pepper stories that come to our mind. But I'm going to count to 7 one more time just to make sure that if you're half formulated with a thought or a question, that you can ask it and direct us.
I'll chime in really quick. As first-gen faculty, it's really nice to hear from other first-gen faculty about their experiences, because I often feel very out of my element on campus, especially so many folks with a doctorate, and I'm always looking at the folks with more experience than me and going beyond where I'm at right now in my career. So hearing like the struggle continues, but all, you know, everything that I've worked for is valuable and stuff like that. Because all the stuff that I felt during undergrad like carries with you through master's degree, through faculty, through like right now trying to host a summit to help other students when I still, you know, have imposter syndrome and all those sorts of things. So this is really great for me. And I also wanted to ask if, I know we already agreed that recording was okay, but if we'll be able to share this either in social media or some way, I can reach out to everyone via email to ask about that, or if we just want to talk about that here, because I think these stories are super valuable. And just because a student may not have been able to join us today for whatever reason, that I think hearing all of this will be super important for them.
You know, Catherine, one of the points you made, one of the things I think is super important is about imposter syndrome. It's something I care a lot about. It's something I feel, honestly, pretty intensely to this day. And my attitude may be shaped by my own feelings of imposter syndrome, that every time I think I've shaken it, it rears its head again. But I kind of feel like unless you're mildly psychotic, you're probably going to feel some imposter syndrome now and then. Like, I worry about the few fellow faculty members who I think, boy, they could use a little imposter syndrome feeling to tone them down a bit. And I just think maybe it's especially a problem in first gen because, right, there's no way someone looking at you knows that you're a first generation student. And yet I feel like you carry that on the inside. You do feel like, oh, I'm getting by with seeming like everyone else, but they all, boy, they sure do have it down. And me, I'm really struggling here. And boy, I really wish every student could just for a second be inside the other students' heads to see how everyone else is feeling that exact same thing.
I think a lot of times students feel that, and not just first-gen students, but every student who goes into a university, it needs to learn how to speak somewhat knowledgeably in multiple discourses. In other words, to do the type of work that we ask them to do in the living and learning communities, in which they're moving from one community to another. They're using different values and assumptions in the different disciplines. They're being called upon, to write because you must, not because it's welling up inside them, but because now is the time to write. The deadline is coming. And I think that oftentimes is kind of a healthy way to find how to participate in those discourses, is to, as Drew said, it would be odd not to feel that, when you're new at a certain discourse. First gen students perhaps could feel it more though, because, as in my experience, I didn't have a lot of the grooming that goes along with the final years of high school, in which maybe some students are taking the AP courses, or at least they're going through the courses that will help them ease into the college experience. And so there's oftentimes a little bit more of a feeling of sink or swim when it comes time to adopt that academic tone for the paper, and if you don't have it, then probably going to be things marked on your paper. You're not using the right kind of language or the right tone and things like that. So you have to learn to adopt it. So I just wanted to say that in particular, I think that happens a lot of times in the writing portion of academics, that sense of I'm not quite sure if I'm pretending to be somebody that I'm not.
Well, and I know in my experience, oh no, please, Christian, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Alyssa, I didn't mean to interrupt. You know, I'm a first generation too, as I was mentioning to you guys earlier when we were introducing each other. And I'm pretty familiar with the imposter syndrome from my own perspective. And I hear other people talking about imposter syndrome as well, which tells me that, oh, I'm not alone, right? There's other people feeling it, and including faculty and that I've come into contact through my career. But I don't know how to tell if other person is feeling the imposter syndrome. I don't know if there is any telltale or any so to speak, physical manifestation of it that can tell me so I can approach it or help other people, especially students. So that's something I was just wondering.
Well, I was just talking about it in terms of writing, and I teach my students this: passive verbs. I tell my students, when I see passive verbs, I know you are afraid. And because if I asked you, how was your day? How was your weekend? You know, you'll say, oh, it was great. I went to this place. We did all these things, all these action verbs. And then I'll say something about, tell me about women's roles in the 19th century in this novel. And then I get, it is not difficult to see that women, blah, blah, are, and suddenly everything turns abstract and everything turns passive. And I get all these multiple word subjects in which are followed by a passive verb. And that's the physical manifestation in writing of fear, of not feeling what you're talking about. And so I think sometimes it's like if you're addressing an issue, a problem, the question is do you fix it so that you can do it right, or do you do it right so that you can undo the problem backwards, like which comes first? And so I try to teach my students how to use those action verbs, not just so that people, don't mark them on the paper or don't think their paper is difficult to read. I teach them to get rid of them, to improve their thinking, to ground themselves when they say something, so that they learn they do have something to say and they don't have to hide behind all those abstractions. So that's one place I see it, is in student writing.
Wow, that's insightful.
I like that example. Sorry, Lisa. But in the sciences, we write everything in passive voice, right? It's
No.
I don't know if the other scientists
said except for APA style, yes.
So I guess like everybody, I don't know, it's I can see from students that are not yet there. Obviously, you can see that you're not asking them for their personal experience. And then you ask them to read papers, and then there's all this passive voice everywhere. So
yeah, and I should say I should qualify the writing advice I give to say that they should only use a passive if they know why they're using it. And if you're if you're writing an APA style and you're talking about the lab experiment, you'll use the passive voice. Or when I hear the dog and my daughter gallivanting in the other room, and then I hear the crash and she comes in and says the lamp is broken, I know she's using the passive for a reason. So there are times when you use it, and so I wouldn't diagnose it across the board, but if I see it really getting in the way of conveying ideas, then I see that there's a problem.
But even more broadly, Tim, what I took away from your example is that like you described it as the manifestation of fear in writing. And I need to think hard about what does the manifestation of fear look like in a sociological conversation or, in my own discipline. That's really helpful. When I've been thinking about imposter syndrome and the way that I have suffered from it, the way that the thing that I guess I should be on the look for my students is that they disappear. So I'm going to share this story. My first year in graduate school. So to be clear, I am not a first generation college student. My mom has a college degree, but I didn't get very much guidance, or she wasn't very available. There wasn't a lot of help during my high school and college years. So I'd share a lot of experiences and characteristics that are typical for first gen students. But I was absolutely a first generation graduate student. And this is where my imposter syndrome story comes from. My first year in graduate school, we all had to take the same classes, the cohort. And so I'm in the sociology statistics class, and I don't know anything about statistics, but I'm learning like everyone else. And at the end of the year, at the end of the year, graduate students had to be evaluated by every faculty member that they had been in contact with as part of their review for whether or not they could stay in the PhD program. And the review from this particular professor who taught the statistics class was, her name's Maria Charles. She's wonderful and amazing in every way. She wrote this glowing paragraph about me for my file. And of course I got to read it, and it was about how I was, I probably have it somewhere, or maybe I burned it, I don't know. But I was ahead of most of my classmates in my understanding of these statistical processes and putting together, the data and the blah, blah, and that I should really consider pursuing a project that used quantitative methods. And I read that, and I was 100% sure that she wasn't talking about me. Not like, oh my gosh, I don't think she's talking, because could that be me? No, I was 100% sure she could not possibly be talking about me. I was mortified that she mistook me for a classmate. She didn't even know my name. She got my name wrong. And she's writing this glowing thing about some other person, and she's putting it in my file, and people are going to figure out this mistake. And once the mistake gets figured out, she's going to be so embarrassed that she didn't know one graduate student from the next. I mean, there were only 9 of us in the cohort. I avoided her for a year. She would be in the hallway and I would walk the other direction because I was so ashamed that I had made such a little impression on her that she confused me with someone who was actually quite good. And I was worried that if we were in the hallway together and someone called my name and, was talking to me, that she might recognize her mistake and be like, wait, that's Lisa? Wait, what? What about, what? This is what I carried around for a year. And it turns out later, once I finally, somehow got over it enough to get to know her a little bit, she thought I was great. She worked really hard to try to get me grant money to be able to pursue a statistical summer program where I could beef up these skills. But then I couldn't even say yes to that. I was just carrying all this baggage around, feeling so inadequate that I didn't even say yes. I turned down the summer program. So maybe one clue that someone has imposter syndrome is that they disappear from the hallway whenever you come into sight. Yeah, it's real.
I think if I can jump in here, I think one of the things, Christian, about telling if someone has imposter syndrome is, my gut feeling is generally you aren't going to have any idea, right? I know in graduate school, we had at Scripps, as you know, it's a pretty small cohort. So there was 5 of us in my year class. And we eventually had enough conversations at one point where we realized every single one of us was thinking everyone else had it down and was brilliant and belonged there. And we were the ones who didn't. But we were really good at faking it and trying to get along and not be outed as someone who, is the one who doesn't belong there. And what I really, honestly, all credit goes to Lisa for this. One of the things I think that's been super powerful with my students is sharing with them like my resume of failure. where I spent a very painful afternoon just going through like everything I've ever applied for or tried for, or grants I've written. You know, I stopped short of including dates I had been turned down for, but pretty much every rejection I had had, and it's like way bigger than my actual CV. And I've sent it to Lisa before, and her response was something about, wow, you're really brave to keep on trying, which I took as sort of a, it hurt a little bit, but, and, you know, I'll be honest, I do sort of, there's always this hesitation before I share it with students, because I still feel like that insecurity where I want to say, but look, I really did get this NSF grant. I did publish these papers. So don't think I'm a bonehead, but that's kind of the point, right? Is that that's, especially in our field in academia, like, well, in life, rejection is common. And it's really, you internalize all those things, but all you see is, it's like looking at someone's Instagram or Facebook where you're like, oh, look, they're always on the beach and healthy and happy and enjoying themselves. So I think that's one of the really tricky parts. But I think that by being open about our own feelings about it, I think it gives students the sort of space where they can then talk about it themselves. Or even if they don't talk about it, I feel like it's probably helping a bunch of students who I will never hear from, and they're never going to tell me, but internally they're like, oh, wow, that, you know, my professor really had that same thing. Well, that's what I tell myself anyway.
I think people do work really hard to hide imposter syndrome because you don't want anybody else to know that you feel that way. But and then one of the other things that I notice with students is they're often they want to do what you think is right, and so that, you know, you can look that they're constantly looking to see if, you know, if you're going to affirm that what they said, and sometimes it's really difficult to encourage people to sort of take an intellectual leap, and that it's okay to explore this area, it's okay to explore that, and that, you know, when you're, that you can go back and rethink it, or you can go back and you know, decide, yeah, there's a kernel of truth in there and I need to bolster it with some other support, or maybe, no, that was an idea, but now it's time just to go in another direction. And so I think that encouraging people to have that willingness to take a chance like that, especially if it's in a public discussion or something, is something that we can try to do to help students get over, you know, being too inhibited by the imposter syndrome.
Catherine, did you want to chime in a moment ago?
Yeah, just going back to what Drew was talking about, and you've talked about the resume of failures. I remembered Marianne invited me to talk to the first gen grad students a couple years ago at one of their open dialogues. And I went through my first gen story and all the various struggles in my resume of failures. But I think I turned it into like, oh, you know, and this happened, and still trying to put a positive spin on it. And a student raised their hand and said, didn't you ever feel like giving up? And I was like, oh, every day, like every single day. And I think that student kind of shocked me out of being like, not like the myth of my first gen life of like, anybody can pick themselves up by their bootstraps, but actually like being honest with myself that like, yes, I wanted to quit literally every day. So all through grad school, like, and undergrad, working 3 jobs and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, looking at all those list of failures and knowing that like, you got to scrap that idea and come up with another one. Especially I've applied to so many like conference presentations and just been denied. And I'm just going to keep applying until they let me in. So, and it's that like fake it till you make it first gen stuff. And going back to what, about the writing, I often have to reread my email and I take out all the apologies. I have to take out all the passive language and just say like, this is what's happening today, period, thank you, comma, you know, instead of saying like, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I know we're all busy. We're in the middle of a pandemic and like, what a hard year. Never mind, I'll just do it myself. So I try to erase all of that language in email, just to like get things done and not seem like an insane person, but also to hide the imposter syndrome from myself and from my colleagues and just get the work done.
I spend half my time writing emails to my class, sprinkling in smileys and exclamation points so I seem approachable, and then the second half removing them so I don't look like a crazy person. So I guess that's similar.
Sounds about right. It sounded like Christian had something to add to, and I just want to, as the moderator, point us toward the clock. We have just a few more minutes together. So Christian.
I was just gonna say, you know, we're Arietta Fleming, she's a faculty in the biology department. Arietta put together a together with the CEE last year, or not, the year before, I think, a really nice conversation to share our failures with students. And I thought that was a really great exercise as an introspection. But I also think this is, you know, it's very useful to hear faculty also talking about this among their, you know, ourselves, so we can put that also in perspective and share these stories with students, because I think students are, you know, they want to hear these things. So I really like that.
You know, I'm sorry, I keep talking so much, but Christian just made me think of the fact that I've been in a few of these things where they ask everyone to present a time that something went wrong or a failure. And one of the things that I worry about is many times when I'm in those meetings, the faculty all present examples that were failures, but that worked out to be fine. You know what I mean? Like they were like, oh, and I accidentally used the wrong chemical in the reaction, but you know, it turned out fine because it was a cure for cancer. So isn't that wonderful? And I kind of think it's really important to have, you know, I always try to make it a point, because I've got plenty of them, to bring up instances where there was a failure and there was no, oh, but it all was bunnies and rainbows afterwards anyway. It's just like, yeah, that was a failure, and I learned from it. I learned what not to do, or, you know, and incorporated that and moved on. Anyway, just a thought. That was a thing. I was in one of those recently, and so many of the faculty were, you know, it was sort of, here's my failure, but look, it led to a published paper. And I'm like, yeah, that's not really a failure. Let me show you what a failure is all about.
So I just wanted to share that I just found out that one of my students in one of my classes previously is a first-gen student. It's Brittany Williams here, although her last name was different when she was in our class. And she was just shared in the chat with me some of what she's been up to, and it's really inspiring. And I just wanted to ask if Brittany would share with the rest of us what she's been doing.
Thank you, Dr. Randall. I just wanted to first thank all the faculty for being here. I saw the agenda for today and saw Dr. Randall would be on this panel. So I was telling him in the chat, I just wanted to pop in and say a thank you for all the ways that he supported me when I was an undergrad student at USD. Was a first gen student. I was in student support services in undergrad, went on to be a McNair scholar as well. I took an English class with Dr. Randall, modern European drama. And then it was my first, probably like, wouldn't have known that later on I'd do my master's degree emphasizing in queer theory, which I did a little bit of queer theory in his class. I didn't know it at the time what that was, but I kind of was using that lens and writing a paper for him. And so I was thanking him for all the support that he gave me as an undergrad student. I actually work full time at the International Center right now as a study abroad manager. I'm also in my first year of the PhD program in Souls. So and I got my master's degree in English. So Dr. Randall was happy about that as well. So I popped in and just wanted to let him know that, you know, as the faculty, all of you here, sometimes you don't even know, like, I don't think I've ever said any of this to him. And this was years ago now that I was an undergrad student. So I just wanted to thank you all for being here and supporting us in this format. And then, you never really know how much of an impact you make on your students. So I'm here as a grad student in this capacity for this summit, but I just wanted to thank you all for your continued support, and especially Dr. Randall, who probably didn't know it, but he made a very big impact on me. So
thank you. It's an amazing story, and I'm so glad you've done so well in a PhD program right now. It's really fantastic.
Thank you all.
What a brilliant way to close out this panel. Thank you, Brittany, for showing up and for sharing your story, and props to Tim Randall. I agree. We are exactly on time. We're great. I know Drew Talley has to take off for another commitment, so thank you so much for being here, and thanks Sue, and thanks Tim, and thanks everyone who is listening in and asking questions and thinking about these issues. I know that just being a part of this conversation, it just makes me feel a little more connected and a little more, I don't know, a little more good to be in company with you all and sharing stories and being first gen. So I turn it back over to Catherine to carry us through the next part of our program.
All right, thank you. I'm actually going to stop recording for the next part since we're doing the trivia and it wouldn't record the breakout rooms anyway. So